first I have to give everybody a disclaimer. This is 100% off message. I work for Mozilla. I am not speaking for Mozilla in this context. All right, so economic signaling. Those of you who follow Rory have heard a lot about the signaling model of advertising, so I'm going to go through this material real quick. It's basically, why does Homo economicus read the advertising but hangs up on cold calls? Or, to put it another way, why is every car commercial the same? It's a different car. It's driving probably along the same or similar road. You could shoot this car driving down a windy road commercial with any car. All that the car commercial tells you is, if it was a waste of your time to test drive our car, then it would have been a waste of our money to make this little movie about it. And there's a whole literature of economics and math about signaling between deceptive senders and honest senders. And with this paper, Gardetti and Bart out of Stanford shows that when the sender wants to really get a message across, counterintuitively, the best thing for the sender to do is deprive themselves of information about the receiver, because if you're in the audience and you know what the sender knows about you, then you can't tell, are they honestly expressing their intentions in the market, or are they just telling you what you want to hear? Anyone who read Computer Shopper magazine for the ads, you don't read this for specific information about all the parts that you might put into your computer when you buy it. You read it to find out which manufacturers are adopting which standards, so you don't buy a motherboard that won't support the video card that you might want to upgrade to next year. And there are really three sets of papers in this literature. I'll put up some notes and some links after the events. But really there are papers that have pure math, where you devise kind of a mathematical game of buyers and sellers and see how that game works out. There are papers where you take users in an experimental setting. In this paper, the Amber and Hollier paper, they took 540 users. They showed them different versions of expensive-looking and cheap-looking advertising that conveys the same information, and see what those users say. So you've got the math, you've got the bunch of users in a room, and then finally you've got the kind of research that looks at spending across different product categories. And in this study, they found that types of advertising, or types of product that have different levels of advertising to sales ratios really depends on how much extra user experience it takes to evaluate that product. So the feedback loop here is, my fonts got eaten alive by this thing, sorry about that. The feedback loop here is that when brands have signaling power, then that means market power for the publishers that carry that advertising, which means advertising rates tend to go up, which means the publishers can afford to make obviously expensive content, and you attach advertising to obviously expensive content, that means more signaling power. It's kind of a loop that builds more and more value for the advertiser. Now, some people compare this to the signaling that a bank does when they build this monstrous stone building to keep your money in. Now, really, the stuff that a bank does, having a stone building doesn't really do any more for keeping money in it than having a metal building or a concrete building. But it just shows that they've got this big stone building with their name on it. So if they were deceptive, it would have been more costly for them to do it. Now, that's the pure signaling model. The other area that we can see when we compare this kind of classic signal-carrying advertising to online advertising, the kind of ads that are targeted to you based on who you are, is what's up with the norms enforcers? Now, Rory has his blue check mark on Twitter. That means Rory doesn't see Twitter ads. Now, I'm less internet famous, so I still get the advertising on Twitter. A lot of the ads that I get are extremely deceptive issue ads. This is a company that's getting sued for lead paint related issues is trying to convince residents of California that government inspectors are coming to their houses to tear them down or declare them a nuisance. This is bogus, and it's the kind of thing that if it appeared in the newspaper that everyone got to see, then journalists and public interest lawyers and everyone else who enforces the norms on how we communicate, they would call it out. But in a targeted ad medium, this kind of deceptive advertising can target me directly. So let me show a little simulation here. Now what we're looking at is deceptive sellers making a sale. And when a deceptive seller makes a sale, that's a red line. We see honest sellers making a sale. When an honest seller makes a sale, that's the green line. Now, the little blue squares are norms enforcers. And the only thing that makes a norms enforcer different in this game from a regular customer is when a deceptive seller contacts a norms enforcer, the deceptive seller pays the price, pays a higher price than they would have made from having a sale. So with honest sellers and deceptive sellers evolving, competing in this primordial soup of customers, what ends up happening to the deceptive sellers that try to do a broad reach and hit a bunch of different customers is, well, you saw them. They hit the norms enforcers. The blue squares lit up. Big deceptive advertisers, as advertisers who are deceptive and try to reach a bunch of different people, end up getting squeezed out in this version of the game. An honest advertiser, like this little square down here, they can reach over the whole board because they don't pay the penalty for reaching a norms enforcer. So what does this really mean for the real web? On the World Wide Web, have we inadvertently built a game that gives an unfair advantage to deceptive sellers? If somebody can take advantage of all the user profiling information that's available out there and say, oh, I believe that these people are rural, low income, unlikely to be finance journalists, therefore I'm going to hit them with the predatory finance ads. As those kinds of things can happen in the web as a medium, does that go back and cause users to be paying less attention to the medium, to be counting ads in that medium as less valuable? And according to the peak advertising effect by Wang and Kamdar, key indicators for online advertising effectiveness have declined since the launch of the first banner advertisement in 1994. That's certainly not news. This is a slide that appeared in Mary Meeker's famous Internet Trends presentation. And as you can see, blue is percentage of ad spending. Gray is percentage of people's time. So TV, 36% of the time, 36% of the money. It's about right. Desktop web, 18%, 20%, about right. What's going on with print? Print is 9% of the money for 4% of the time. Now, you might say this is just inertia, that this year people are finally just cutting back on spending money in print because of people spending less time on print, and it'll eventually catch up. But I actually went back and plotted the same slide from the same presentation going back to 2011. And I've got time plotted across the bottom, money plotted on the y-axis. And what do we see about print? Print is on a whole different trend line. Print is on a trend line of much more value to the advertiser per unit of time spent than these other ad media. My hypothesis is that targeting breaks signaling, and this means an opportunity. Targeting means that when you see an ad coming in targeted to you, it's more like a cold call. It doesn't carry a credible bit of information about the seller's intention in the market. And from the point of view of who has an incentive to support signal-carrying ad media, well, again, the fonts got eaten, but the people who have an interest in that signal for attention bargain, in that positive feedback loop, are, of course, the publishers, high reputation brands that want to be able to send that signal, writers, photographers, editors, people who get paid by that publisher, and people who benefit from the positive externalities of those signal-carrying cultural works. So, if the signaling model is such a big thing, then why are there so many targeted ads still out there? Nudges. Let's have a look at, just to pick an example, the Facebook advertising policy. Now, as you know, the Facebook advertising platform will let you micro-target individuals extremely specifically. You can pick out 7 people in Florida. You can pick out everyone who's looking for an apartment who doesn't have a certain ethnic affinity, that kind of thing. But the one thing you're not allowed to do with respect to Facebook targeting is put anything in your ad that might indicate how you're targeting it. Policy says ads must not contain content that asserts or implies personal attributes. You can't say, I know you're male or female, I know your sexual orientation, I know what you do for a living. You have to make a very generic, the ad copy has to be generic, even if the targeting can be extremely specific. You can't even say other. You can't say meet other singles, because that implies that the advertiser knows that the reader is signal. So you can't say depression getting you down. Facebook will let you target people with depression, but you can't reveal that you know that about them. Another good example is Target. They do targeting of individuals who they believe to be pregnant, but they'll pad out those ads for baby stuff with ads for other types of products so as not to creep everybody out. So back to our shared interest in signal for attention bargain. Of course, pretty much everybody has an interest in that original positive feedback loop of getting the higher reputation for brands, of getting reputation-driven publishers that'll build high-quality content for us. Writers and photographers have an interest in getting paid. People who are shopping for goods, they're the ones who want the signal the most. And all that stands on the opposite side is behavioral tricks to conceal targeting. Now, I'm not going to say this is a privacy issue. I know that there are privacy issues here, but that is really not my department. Besides, Facebook just announced a dating site, so they're going to breed privacy preferences out of the user base anyway. So, can the web as an advertising medium be redefined with better market design to make it work better for carrying signal? We know from the existence of print that this type of signal carrying ad medium can exist. Print is an existence proof of signal carrying advertising. We also know that building that kind of an ad medium can't be that hard because print was built when people were breathing fumes from molten lead all day. This is the lead melting component of a linotype machine. And what's the prize from this? Well, the prize is all the cultural works that you get. When somebody like Kurt Vonnegut could quit his job as manager of a car dealership and write for Collier's magazine full time, well, this book is still on sale with the resulting stories. And of course, local news. Our democracy depends on the vital flow of information of public interest. And some people will say that the problem with news and information on the web is that it's all been made free. Well, if it's free of charge, that's a problem. If people would just subscribe, then we could fix the system. But honestly, if free was the problem, then Walter Cronkite here would have destroyed the media business in 1962. It's a market design problem and a signaling problem, not just a problem of who has to pay for what. Now we get into the role of the web browser. And honestly, the web browser got a bunch of things wrong in the 1990s. There are certain patterns of information flow that got created, like third-party tracking or some companies being able to follow your activity from site to site and others not, and data leakage, and things that just don't work according to the way that people expect. Most people don't want their activity on one site to follow them over to another site, and the original batch of web browsers got that terribly wrong. The good news is web browsers are getting it right, and web browsers are under tremendous pressure now to do so. As a product, the web browser is pretty much complete and working and generic. The whole point of a web browser is it shows websites the same as all the other web browsers do. There's less and less reason for a user to want to switch web browsers, but everybody who is trying to get you to install a web browser needs for there to be a reason. So the opportunity for browsers is to align with those interests of users that the browser wasn't able to pick up on previously. So at Mozilla, some of our user researchers recently did a study on users with no ad blocker installed and users within the first few weeks of installing an ad blocker. And they did the statistics and experiment design, great. They split up the user groups. Anybody want to guess on the increased engagement, how much more time those ad blocker users spend with that same browser than the non-ad blocker users? Anybody shout out a number? All right, 28%. From the point of view of the browser, those kinds of numbers, moving user engagement in a way that helps that browser meet its goals, that's something that the browser can't ignore doing. So now, we're going from the old web game of trying to win by collecting as much data on people as you can without their permission to a new game in which the browser, high reputation publishers, and high reputation brands are all aligned in trying to build enough trust to work on a basis of information that users choose to share. And I know when I say information that users choose to share, you're going to think about all these GDPR dialogues. And I know I've seen these too, and there are just tons of companies on these. There can be 500 companies on a GDPR dialogue. And to be honest, looking at some of these company names, it looks like most of them were made up by guys from Florida who communicate primarily by finger guns. So this is definitely not what I'm talking about. Users should not have to micromanage their consent for all this data collection activity any more than email users should have to go in and read their SMTP headers. So we can get that positive feedback loop between high reputation content, high reputation brands back. And really, if you think about what brands are, it's offloading information about a product buying decision onto the reputation coprocessor in the user's brain. So it's kind of like taking a computational task, and instead of running it on the CPU in your data center where you have to pay the power and cooling bills for it, you offload it. You run it on the GPU, on the client. It'll run faster, it'll run better, and the audience is maintaining that reputation state. It's not big data that you have to crunch through. The future is here. It's just not very evenly distributed, as William Gibson said. This is the cyberpunk of the 90s. Today, all of this stuff, his scanner, his video camera, his laptop, all that stuff's on a phone now. The privacy-sensitive users, the ones who are working based on user permissioned data sharing, they're out there. They're in niches today. If you have those users, now's an opportunity to connect with them, figure out how to build that signal-carrying advertising game, and create a reputation-based advertising model for the web. So, thank you very much.